Tonight, you don't need to think. You don't need to try. Just rest. As you fall asleep, your mind becomes naturally open, calm, receptive, and focused. This story was designed to guide your subconscious toward clarity, confidence, and wealth while your body rests. There's nothing you need to do, just listen and sleep. It was a night like any other, though she had come to dread exactly those. The nights that began with lists and ended with questions. Anna stood at the window, the city humming with distant lights and possibilities, but her mind returned instead to a heavy silence. That inner territory where she measured herself against standards that changed, hopelessly, from moment to moment. Her hands gripped the porcelain mug, fingers tapping an unconscious rhythm, as if seeking some code that might unlock a calmer version of herself. She often found herself here, in this quiet, suspended between hope and resignation, wondering if the next project, the next risk, the next compromise would bring the ease she imagined lived somewhere just beyond her reach. Across town, Luis was folding the day into its habitual corners, receipts tucked away, keys replaced, his voice still echoing in his head from meetings where words always seemed to flutter and fade instead of landing with certainty. Lately, he'd started to wonder if every room expected something from him that his voice was too hesitant to deliver. It was not ambition that kept him up, but rather the persistent feeling that the world listened selectively, only truly hearing those who radiated a confidence he'd never dared to test in himself. Tomorrow's early presentation flickered at the edge of his thoughts. Would they hear him this time, or just listen for someone else? And in a small apartment wrapped in gentle shadows, Sophia brushed her teeth in front of a narrow mirror, replaying the same phrase in her head. You need to show more authority. It was not the first time she'd heard it, yet every repetition scratched at her peace, leaving only more questions. How does one wear authority? Is it a suit? A stance? A melody in one's voice? She longed to inhabit a calm, unassertive power, one that did not force attention but instead drew it with quiet certainty, but finding that shape inside herself had proved elusive. There is a strange crossroads where such nights meet, where questions of worth, capability, and direction gather in the silences, just beneath the hum of the world going on. Whether Anna gazed into the city's distance, Luis stared at his tired reflection in the microwave door, or Sophia traced the soft line of her jaw, they each circled the same invisible point. They wanted more. Not just more money, though that, too. Money was a shorthand for other hungers: acceptance, respect, the freedom to choose. In the shadowy quiet, they wondered why, though they obeyed all the external rules and met all prescribed standards, real ease kept slipping away. Tonight, however, will be different. Unbeknownst to them, the city below and the wind that stirs nothing in particular are on the verge of welcoming them into a new kind of journey. It is not a journey with loud declarations or grand performances. Instead, it will be a quiet crossing, one that neither demands courage nor shouts of change, but welcomes a far more subtle shift. One that begins not with action, but with an almost imperceptible reordering of the inside. Each of them, in their separate corners of the city, is about to touch something rarely named but profoundly felt, a presence. Something in them knows, faintly, that what they have sought outside is, perhaps, a whisper growing gradually clearer within. This story, woven through with the ordinary and the extraordinary, does not promise treasure maps or secret formulas. Rather, it offers a guided meandering, a gentle, deep reflection into the soft space between thought and sleep, where the truest foundations of self-direction begin to take shape. No one here is led with force, threatened with scarcity, or frantically urged to prove anything to anyone. But as the city quiets and the last lights blink away, there grows, almost imperceptibly, a new kind of clarity, one that is neither boastful nor trembling, but calmly present. As their night unfolds, these characters will come to recognize that authority, in its most mysterious and generative form, does not need to assert itself aloud. Somewhere, Just beyond the edge of consciousness, Anna, Luis, and Sophia will find themselves invited to slip softly into a presence that asks nothing except that they quietly trust their own command. The journey that awaits does not begin with a race, a challenge, or even a lesson. It begins with a question neither desperate nor loud, but peaceful, as if, while the world rests, something inside them is waking, a quiet certainty, a new relationship with what they once called scarcity, and an ease that reveals itself as the story lingers, gently, through the hours of the night. Those who travel this narrative to its end may notice, on waking, an unfamiliar sensation, not urgency, but steadiness. Not a demand to prove, but an invitation simply to move, at last, from within. At that late hour, Anna found herself absorbed in the shifting play of headlights drifting across her walls, each beam a quiet visitor that hinted at movement and change without demanding attention. She let her gaze soften, observing not the patterns cast, but what they managed to reveal, the edges of a shelf she'd not dusted in weeks, the glint of an envelope peeking beneath a book. Her eyes traced their way, almost absent-mindedly, to a note pinned discreetly behind her curtain. It was a phrase she had scribbled months ago, something she barely remembered. You decide the weather inside. Unlike commands or affirmations barked from self-help bestsellers, this phrase held neither urgency nor promise, just a soft suggestion of power housed in stillness. The more Anna considered it, the more she sensed a space within herself, uncluttered, undemanding, where daily storms lost momentum. In another neighborhood, Luis, tired from a day unraveling into endless tasks, stood at his balcony, inhaling the cool air. For him, moments like these offered a rare vantage point. From up here, his anxieties seemed less monumental, shrinking to little more than background static behind the subtle sounds of leaves rustling somewhere close. He thought about how, throughout history, some people appeared magnetized to good fortune, their presence inviting not only wealth, but also loyal collaborators and unexpected allies. These weren't always the loudest or most visible figures. Often, they were those who walked into a room aware not of what others might think, but of their own inner equilibrium. This reminded him of a story his grandfather used to tell, about a fisherman who never bragged about his catches, yet always returned with a full net. When questioned, the old man would shrug, saying, "Water listens better to those who speak less to it and more to themselves." Luis, now reflecting quietly, wondered, in what ways do daily choices broadcast signals that invite or repel prosperity? Meanwhile, along a winding staircase that creaked under gentle footsteps, Sophia descended, her thoughts unraveling new pathways. Recently appointed to a new position, she found herself surrounded by voices that presumed authority meant controlling others' perceptions. Yet as she entered her dimly lit kitchen, something softer persuaded her otherwise. She poured herself a glass of water, listening to its gentle ripple, and recognized how true influence rarely required fight or manipulation. Instead, it resembled gravity, silent but persuasive, present in each gesture and in the quiet confidence that shaped her smallest decisions. For Sophia, authority was never a mask. It was an alignment, a sort of invisible architecture supporting her every motion, even when doubts tried to pull her elsewhere. Drawing from these individual moments, a broader pattern unfolded, like a magnetic field beneath the surface, quietly drawing resources, opportunities, and people toward those whose self-belief was not an act, but a wellspring. No matter the external chaos, Anna, Luis, and Sophia each discovered, in their own peculiar settings, how subtle recalibrations, choosing which thoughts to water, which doubts to starve, could tilt the axis of their internal dialogue. Consider, for a moment, how differently events might unravel if, rather than reacting to each fleeting challenge, attention shifted inward, becoming a sanctuary from which solutions spring naturally. As Anna retreated into the softness of her chair, her breath sinking to a slower tempo, she began to appreciate a subtle shift. She remembered hearing, "You become the answer you seek." Was this merely a comforting fiction, or something deeper? Similarly, Louise fingered the edges of an old photograph, recalling a time when confidence was not spoken, but lived in laughter and small, decisive choices. Sophia, watching the steam curl above her tea, mused at how influence grew strongest not in the confrontations, but in the pauses between them, where a new kind of certainty might quietly take root. Tonight, as their thoughts meandered, each one sensed a gentle invitation to rewrite past narratives of waiting or wishing. Perhaps, without striving or persuasion, real prosperity begins as a silent recognition, the unshakable trust in their own command, where no proof was needed, because the answer had always resided quietly, waiting to be claimed. Beyond Anna's window, thunderclouds began sculpting restless shadows against the glass. A silent performance she watched from her armchair, knees pulled close. She loosened her grip on the chipped mug that had grown tepid in her hands. The unease in her chest gave way to a new kind of alertness, prompted not by worry, but by an unfamiliar current calling her attention. This time, as the wind pressed against the panes, it wasn't an external demand, but a subtle awareness emerging from within her. Unbidden, she recalled a memory from childhood. Her grandfather, hunched over a chessboard, explaining that strong moves are not always loud. Most power, he said, touching a pawn gently, is silent and patient, waiting for the right moment to guide the whole board. The reminiscence awakened something more profound than nostalgia, a spark inviting Anna to explore quiet mastery as an everyday compass. Meanwhile, Luis wandered along rain-slicked pavement, shoes echoing under dimly glowing streetlights. Recent setbacks at work had left him skeptical of promises of transformation. Still, he couldn't ignore the subtle shift in his gait. He passed a small bakery, its warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk, just as the owner, a gray-haired woman named Marta, emerged with leftover bread to set on a nearby bench. Her gesture undramatic, yet somehow magnetic. As he paused to thank her, Luis detected in Marta's eyes a steadiness, not forged by applause, but by years spent trusting her quiet decisions, choosing simplicity over spectacle. That evening, he carried the bread, but also a question. How do subtle routines, nearly invisible to observers, accumulate into a foundation that others sense as unshakable certainty? On a parallel avenue, Sophia surveyed an unfamiliar room filled with new faces, each person's laughter rising and falling in unpredictable waves. Conversation swirled, sometimes sharp, sometimes easy, yet as introductions faded, she observed patterns beneath the noise. Far from chasing approval, a middle-aged man across the table simply listened. No eager nods, no forced smiles, only an unhurried steadiness radiating from his posture. Sophia watched, curious, as people, almost unconsciously, directed questions toward him, seeking not answers but reassurance. Later, as rain tapped the rooftop above, she asked herself whether true influence is less about persuasion and more about creating an atmosphere in which others naturally gather, drawn by a sense of assurance that needs no announcement. Moving beyond these glimpses, consider how quiet authority expresses itself in unexpected domains. Anna, feeling bolder, started using her newfound inner compass to set boundaries with grace rather than defensiveness. She declined requests that once drained her, offering polite explanations that surprised both herself and her colleagues. Meanwhile, Luis began trusting small judgments, rearranging projects to better match his strengths, even if it meant resisting the urge to please everyone. As opportunities gradually realigned to fit his internal criteria, he discovered that outcomes were not always instantaneous, but grew reliable with time. Sophia, intrigued by her observations, experimented with silence during meetings, allowing space after speaking so that her intentions were received without rush. The results were subtle but unmistakable. New collaborators offered ideas more freely, and difficult clients responded with less resistance. Inch by inch, an environment emerged where direction was communicated not by domination, but by presence, as if the texture of the room itself reshaped around steady purpose. What happens, then, when someone brings this composed presence into personal relationships? In the quiet that follows difficult conversations, when accusations or doubts threaten to spiral, a calm yet unyielding outlook steers dynamics away from conflict without a single raised voice. It's as though trust is built not through dramatic declarations, but through the consistent application of intention. Patient gestures that replace veiled competition with mutual respect. Consider, now, moments from your life when someone's silent conviction shifted an entire situation. A teacher who never raised their voice, a friend whose mere glance offered comfort after a storm. Contemplate how these memories settle differently in the mind than those dominated by noise or chaos. There lies the invitation of this night, to notice how maturity shapes itself, not in shouts or applause, but through a gentle yet formidable clarity, quietly drawing resources, respect, and possibility into orbit. As dusk settled in, Marcos wandered through an art gallery illuminated by amber lamps, his boots echoing across marble floors as patrons whispered admiration for vibrant canvases. Amid walls adorned with abstract dreams, his attention was drawn not to the dazzling centerpiece, but to a modest landscape tucked into a silent corner. The scene, just hills, water, and an empty, winding road, somehow radiated an inexplicable pull. A plaque beside the frame detailed that the artist painted only for herself, ignoring commissions or trends, and this authenticity had attracted collectors from across continents, each sensing a calm force in her work. For Marcos, this realization sparked a new awareness. His thoughts unraveled. Perhaps the magnetic quality of wealth and recognition does not depend solely on skilled technique or public display, but on the integrity quietly woven through each intention and action. Meanwhile, Rosa, seated in an old bookstore hidden behind a maze of alleyways, listened intently as a seasoned entrepreneur recounted struggles from decades past. There was a turning point, the speaker explained, when I stopped performing for approval and began to act from a clear, internal resolve. Opportunities didn't appear overnight. They gathered, almost as if invisible threads noticed my newfound certainty and responded in kind. Her words lingered around Rosa like an unspoken promise, stirring her curiosity beyond mere ambition. Unlike the usual tales of grinding effort, this account suggested a resonance between personal truth and the environment. It made Rosa question whether her sacrifices were truly necessary, or if a quieter, self-possessed path could bring more lasting abundance. Elsewhere, Diego flipped through an inherited ledger filled with neat columns of numbers and translucent, handwritten notes. Most were routine calculations, but in the margins, his grandfather had scrawled observations. Wait for silence in the market before investing, and risk only feels dangerous if you pretend. Each line contained far more than financial acumen. Embedded within was the wisdom of not letting noise from outside drown out calm, internal instructions. As Diego ran his fingers over the fragile paper, a thought dawned on him. Could true prosperity result from each decision aligning seamlessly with personal clarity, the same way the lines in a ledger eventually balance only when each entry is intentional? The realization both grounded and invigorated him, giving shape to ambitions he'd left vague for years. Further, during an evening spent at a secluded seaside inn, Teresa sipped herbal tea, tracing small circles along the porcelain cup's rim. Conversation with a retired musician, whose fame blossomed late in life, revealed a counterpoint to the usual tales of striving. I stopped trying to control people's perception, he reflected, and channeled attention only toward nurturing my craft, tuning it until it rang true to me. When I did that, everything and everyone else adjusted, sometimes immediately, sometimes after a long hush. Teresa contemplated this new lens. Did moments of greatest advancement often unfold not after striving, But after letting go of the need to direct outcomes, this question clung to her thoughts, challenging the patterns she'd long considered immutable. In connecting these disparate threads, what arises is a striking pattern. Strength aligned with inner clarity seems to gather resources, relationships, and chances for growth almost organically. Now, consider how this phenomenon might unfold in moments when unexpected obstacles emerge, like a job loss, a sudden shift in market conditions, or rejection by influential voices. Imagine someone in that juncture, pausing rather than scrambling, trusting an anchored resolve not shaken by appearances. How different might the story unravel if the initial reflex was quiet confidence instead of panic or self-doubt? The landscape of possibilities shifts as options become visible that frantic searching would surely have missed. Far from the corridors of loud negotiation or showmanship, the night deepens. In stillness, choices take on a luminous quality, each shaped by the unique harmony of character developed away from the spotlight. Encounters become richer, alliances more genuine, and the flow of fortune, however measured, begins to gather around people who approach the world with unwavering composure. In the hush that precedes sleep, there grows an understanding. Rather than being convinced or coerced, affluence listens for the calm signal of silent mastery. Thus, as dreams beckon and the familiar world dissolves, unseen doors begin to open to those who carry this rare and steadfast presence. Fresh rain slicked the cobblestones as Nora navigated narrow alleyways on her way to an evening gathering. Her mind wandered beyond routine, drawn toward the subtle interplay of intuition and external events that marked her recent experiences. Passing street performers and scattered laughter from terrace diners, she sensed her surroundings shift almost imperceptibly. Each intersection, each warm light spilling from a window, seemed to hint at networks of influence less tangible than money or reputation. Traces of connectedness, chance, and an undercurrent of synchronicity. Nora's reflections deepened when, across the square, she spotted a chess game unfolding between strangers who had never spoken before. Observing their silent gestures and almost telepathic understanding, she marveled at how authority sometimes arises through a shared rhythm, where trust and initiative grow in response to an unspoken mutual respect. Further along, at an artisan studio, Adrian carefully assembled hand-bound journals, arranging them by cover motif rather than popularity or demand. Each choice was deliberate, audacious even, pushing against accepted wisdom in favor of something more personal. Throughout the night, colleagues questioned his priorities. Why ignore trends or statistics? Why invest in unconventional materials? Yet Adrian noticed something unexpected. Visitors lingered around his displays. Customers approached quietly, drawn by a sense of originality and integrity that bypassed fashionable advice. Through this process, Adrian uncovered an aspect of prosperity rarely discussed. Sometimes, success is shaped by making space for the genuine, daring to let decision-making unfold from a place impervious to market noise or social comparison. This approach allowed him to navigate uncertainty with a calmness that clients sensed even before words were exchanged. Meanwhile, Layla prepared for a challenging mediation meeting in a glass-walled office overlooking distant hills. She had built her reputation not through forcefulness, but by cultivating patience and the art of timing. Entering the room, she noticed heightened energy. Eyes darted, voices hovered just above a whisper. Instead of immediately intervening, Layla allowed each participant's urgency to subside, reading subtle cues, a clenched fist, someone's tapping foot. Slowly, she interjected with a question, not to provoke, but to surface perspectives rarely aired aloud. By creating pockets of silence, she opened a stage upon which grievances and aspirations could coexist without judgment. This tactful restraint, she realized, shaped the outcome not by overpowering resistance, but by letting others find clarity through her steadiness. Suddenly, what began as confrontation transformed into collaborative problem-solving. In this space, wealth took on new shape. not as a heap of resources, but as the freedom that arises when people feel genuinely seen and acknowledged. Now, think about how these vignettes mirror personal crossroads. Imagine someone facing a split-second decision. Should she align her next step with precedent or venture into intuition's domain? This balancing act between predictability and creative openness is rarely discussed in conventional notions of ambition, yet it often generates the spark for unexpected windfalls or opportunities. By welcoming unpredictability, individuals learn to observe patterns, economic, social, or emotional, that would otherwise remain hidden in plain sight. Consequently, what begins as a solitary pursuit for stability and acceptance gradually reveals itself as a dance between self-assurance and responsive adaptation. Finally, consider an artist experimenting with color in the hush of early morning, the canvas responding differently depending on her willingness to pause, to reconsider, to embrace imperfection. In these moments, mastery evolves, not as a grand unveiling, but as a series of minor adjustments, each imbued with curiosity. This iterative process is where ease and affluence quietly begin to surface. Circumstances seem to respond more favorably, relationships soften, and the horizon of possibility expands. As sleep draws near and the night deepens, these stories linger as gentle reminders. Sometimes it is the understated presence, the willingness to act in harmony with subtle cues, that quietly rewrites lives and opens unexpected doors. Anyone listening finds themselves held by an enveloping sense of promise, where quiet confidence is the truest magnet for lasting good fortune. Amid the humming of distant traffic lights, Julia paced the polished floor of her quiet office, moonlight draped across her desk in faint, fragmented stripes. Her fingers paused above the keys of a half-finished email as she reflected on a recent conversation with her mentor, Mr. Cebrian. He had urged her to consider how the stories she told herself at dusk seeped into her decisions at dawn. Julia, previously tethered to other people's expectations, found herself compelled by the subtle authority that comes not from proclamations but from a slow, internal reckoning. Elsewhere, Matteo sifted through antique coins scattered over a velvet cloth, letting the cool metal press into his palms. Each coin told a story of traded fortunes, yes, but also of confidence earned patiently across generations. As he examined the faded etchings, Matteo was struck by how fortunes endured or evaporated, hinging not on bravado but on the quiet power of consistency. That realization nudged him to act with steadier resolve in his latest negotiation, trusting the strength that was growing quietly behind his habitual uncertainty. Meanwhile, in a luminous kitchen filled with the aroma of roasted peppers, Lucia arranged ingredients with careful deliberation. Her culinary art had gained admiration, yet her peers often attributed her success solely to her technical flair. Few noticed the deeper transformation at play. Lucia now chose her recipes guided by deeply felt intuition, refusing to chase fleeting applause or trends. The more she listened to internal cues, sometimes manifesting as a fleeting memory, other times a persistent sense of readiness, the more naturally acclaim, invitations, and prosperity found her doorstep. In her experience, self-assuredness simmered like a secret ingredient, unseen, yet gradually permeating every aspect of her craft. Carving out his own path, Raphael managed a quiet library nestled between cascading gardens and bustling pedestrian lanes. Visitors arrived daily seeking books and wisdom, but Raphael's influence extended deeper. He had an uncanny way of orchestrating peace when tensions rose, often by gently nudging conversation rather than lecturing or intervening directly. Over the years, Raphael observed a curious phenomenon. The spaces he tended attracted opportunities, donations, partnerships, and even rare manuscripts, simply because his calm diligence shaped the environment. The space didn't just store stories, it inspired them. Observers eventually recognized that prosperity sometimes enters not through invitation, but as a natural response to sustained, unwavering presence. Shifting gears, Carmen faced a turbulent team meeting as the sole voice advocating for a risky but promising project. By resisting the urge to dominate, and instead anchoring herself with a confident stillness, she noticed something peculiar. Colleagues gradually leaned in, not swept up by spectacle, but drawn by the unwavering conviction present in her measured responses. Tension gave way to curiosity, and skepticism softened. In that crucible, Carmen's calm became magnetic, shaping outcomes without any overt attempt at persuasion. Now, imagine how this principle unfolds when daily routines begin with silent affirmations of self-value, when mornings are no longer hostage to doubt, but become a rehearsal for leadership. Everyday choices made in this spirit, accepting an unexpected challenge, for instance, or declining a draining obligation, gradually realign energies and external conditions in striking ways. It is as if the act of holding firm, wordlessly yet visibly, plants seeds destined to blossom into unforeseen rewards. As Julia finished her email, her thoughts wandered to the subtle interplay of decision and destiny. What melodies of fortune await when each gesture reflects not anxiety, but composure? Is it possible that life itself listens more closely to subdued confidence than to anxious striving? This question gently accompanied her as she switched off the desk lamp, letting quiet anticipation fill her small sanctuary. In a quiet corner of an ancient village ringed with olive groves, Isabel took her habitual evening stroll, winding her way past fields glimmering with dew. Yet tonight, her mind buzzed with fresh uncertainty sparked by an unexpected letter. A distant cousin had written, seeking her advice on an inheritance dispute. This request, coming from a relative she barely knew, struck Isabel as odd and oddly significant. As her footsteps crunched over gravel, it occurred to her that people sense where steadiness exists, even from afar. They seek guidance where they perceive equilibrium, drawn to confidence whose assurance is felt before it's ever spoken. Meanwhile, Miguel hunched over his woodworking bench, lost in the hypnotic rhythm of sanding a piece of walnut. Though celebrated in town for his craft, he had recently confronted a dilemma with his apprentice. The young man's impatience threatened to ruin a promising project. Miguel might have barked instructions, but instead, he paused and captured his apprentice's gaze. Quietly, he shared a story of a famed Japanese carpenter who carved wooden joints so complex, they seemed to fuse material with intuition. "Patience isn't simply waiting," Miguel murmured. "It is trusting your intention until the wood itself responds." In that charged silence, his apprentice's frustration softened into curiosity. Miguel recognized that mastery over one's work, and consequently how fortune arrived, sometimes hinged less on expertise and more on the composure to let one's presence settle deeply into each gesture. Simultaneously, across a bustling riverside market, Elvira closed her kiosk for the day with a distinct sense of anticipation. She had always believed her prosperity would bloom from relentless effort or flashy marketing. But now, something had begun to shift. Lately, customers lingered at her stall not because of loud displays, but for the atmosphere she cultivated, a patchwork of dried lavender, handwritten stories tucked inside packages, peaceful smiles exchanged even in rush hour. One afternoon, a traveler confessed she'd come back to the market solely for the tranquility she discovered in that moment by Elvira's side. This encounter prompted Elvira to reflect. Perhaps influence is accrued quietly, layering over time like brushstrokes, so that, eventually, people can sense calm and order before even recognizing its source. Building from these lived moments, a new landscape of possibilities unfolds. Imagine Tomas, a once bold entrepreneur, sitting across from a consortium poised to invest in his next venture. All eyes are locked on him, yet he sits back, listens carefully, then vocalizes only one incisive question, quietly, but with unwavering resolve. Though competitors fill the air with promises, Tomas radiates patience and trust in his vision. Soon, the room's energy leans unmistakably toward him. Decisions, as if magnetized, begin to align in his favor, not from bluster, but from the gravity of composure. Furthermore, picture Louisa, an aspiring playwright, witnessing rehearsals of her script falling short. She resists the urge to intervene or direct every line. Instead, during a pause, she invites her actors to share their interpretations. Through attentive silence and genuine engagement, she becomes a catalyst, allowing creative currents to surface. Remarkably, the play transforms. Actors find nuances they never anticipated. Her inner guidance breathes life into the process, drawing unexpected brilliance from all involved. Gradually, these stories reveal a pattern. People and opportunities gravitate instinctively to those who anchor themselves in tranquil certainty, even in complexity. Now, consider facing crossroads: a job proposal in a field you never imagined, or a new collaboration with unclear direction. Would adopting gentle composure sharpen perception, allowing you to read intentions unspoken? In moments of ambiguity, a calm posture can illuminate choices invisible in haste. Perhaps the greatest shifts arrive, not as thunderclaps, but as flocks of migratory birds, ordinary at a glance, yet carrying seasons of change on silent wings. This cultivated presence invites new chapters into being, lighting the path not with fanfare, but with steady, patient glow. Intrigued by the recent shifts in her daily routine, Isabel wandered beyond the familiar olive groves, guided by rhythms she couldn't easily name. The breeze held an uncommon sharpness. It seemed to usher in a heightened awareness, each scent and distant call of a bird marking a freshly vivid boundary between her private musings and the greater pulse of existence. On a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, she paused to take in the vastness, her breath sinking with an unspoken cadence that set her apart. As she rested, her gaze drifted toward a cluster of lights flickering below, signs of activity, commerce, and ambition pulsing through windows and doorways. For the first time, Isabel perceived not simply labor or exchange, but a choreography of intent and receptivity swaying quietly beneath every transaction. At that same hour, Miguel invited his apprentice to join him for a walk across fields soaked in moonlit silver. The young man, eager to prove his merit through action and declaration, fidgeted against the hush unfolding between them. Miguel spoke little, choosing instead to let their footsteps crunch softly along the dry earth. After a stretch of silence, Miguel pointed to a barn owl gliding effortlessly nearby, its path unpredictable yet precise. "Notice how it moves," he murmured, neither chasing nor resisting, only responding to what each moment brings. The apprentice initially squinted, uncertain what lesson lay in this quiet spectacle. Yet as the bird circled and vanished into the oaks beyond, he felt an unfamiliar steadiness settle over his thoughts, a distinct sense that resolve could be drawn not from assertion, but from aligning with a greater pulse that required no words. Meanwhile, Elvira lingered after closing her market stall, tracing the worn edges of her counter, her fingers soaking in the cool relief. She observed the flurry of shoppers and vendors who, despite being surrounded by constant motion, often seemed to move without direction, chasing urgency, missing the gentle signals guiding true prosperity. A well-dressed stranger approached, pausing to admire the bouquet of lavender on display. Elvira greeted him with a gentle nod. Their ensuing conversation meandered, from the enduring fragrance of the herbs to the slow cultivation of trust with regular clients, revealing how presence itself could shape outcomes far beyond the reach of mere strategy. The stranger, an investor in search of fresh inspiration, left with more than a bundle of herbs. He carried with him an impression of quiet solidity that sparked a proposal for partnership days later, transforming Elvira's path in ways she had never forecast. Not far away, Tomas stood on a balcony above a bustling plaza, his mind spinning as he weighed a difficult decision. He resisted the urge to solicit advice or reassure his backers with grand promises. Instead, he let the sounds from below wash over him: laughter, arguments, the echo of a distant ballad, each note a testament to lives shaped by risk and patience. Tomas let those sounds unravel his tension until conviction welled up from somewhere deep, reframing his sense of readiness. When he finally stepped inside to address his team, no preamble was needed. His first suggestion, clear and measured, drew immediate attention. Even the most skeptical colleagues sensed an unshakable composure infusing his words, fueling confidence in ventures to come. Simultaneously, Luisa, immersed in the dim hush backstage, studied the movements of her actors through a parting in the curtain. She realized that creativity, much like the wild energy rippling through opening night, could be encouraged only by offering a wide, permissive space unburdened by preconceptions. Each performer, emboldened by her quiet invitation and the freedom to reinterpret, discovered greater depths, new gestures, tender glances, surprises born of mutual trust. The resulting performance captivated the audience, not because it was flawless, but because it pulsed with a sincerity impossible to manufacture on command. Consider now how unexpected clarity emerges at the edge of uncertainty. For these characters, assurance did not materialize in triumph or applause, but rather in the moments where listening surpassed speaking and presence brought coherence from apparent chaos. Crossing unseen thresholds, they each discovered that the power to magnetize opportunity was never about force, but about embodying an internal alignment that gently, yet unmistakably, compelled outcomes into new formations. As these instances unfolded across fields, markets, balconies, and stages, life itself seemed to respond, rearranging possibility around unwavering conviction patiently anchored in silence. Reflecting on this journey so far, it becomes clear that beneath the surface of each story, invisible gears have quietly turned, shaping moment after moment. As dusk drapes its hush across open windows and distant lights, individuals move, though often unaware, toward the gentle orbit of an inner voice less fraught with apprehension, more rooted in a kind of calm that does not shout for recognition. There is a rhythm to it, as if a tide once hidden beneath ordinary routine is slowly making itself known, carrying traces of self-possession where once hesitation dwelled. Throughout quiet intersections of daily life, characters navigate spaces thick with possibility and uncertainty. Yet something within them starts to echo, a newfound resonance that subtly colors every word chosen, every silence held. In the interplay between action and pause, their gestures begin to embody a quality both tranquil and quietly assertive, shaping interactions in unseen yet unmistakable ways. It is much like a garden at nightfall. The richest fragrances only release themselves when all else stills, and what seemed commonplace during daylight becomes charged with new meaning and suggestion. Across these shared spaces, a sense of convergence weaves through the tapestry of their interactions. Narratives once disparate now start to link, entwined as branches that, reaching for sunlight, gradually find they are sustained by roots deeper than wind or passing seasons could disturb. Neither abrupt discovery nor single utterance can explain this shift. It is the gradual unspooling of old doubts that now gives way to a current of assurance moving quietly beneath the surface. As time glides onward, moments that once seemed insignificant, an exchanged glance, an unhurried response, a decision made without expectation of applause, begin to shimmer with a quiet significance. People around them sense these delicate changes. Conversations seem to flow more freely, contingencies lose their sting, and opportunities arrive as if drawn to the calm that blossoms organically within. This isn't a stillness that signals resignation, but one alight with potential, a silent readiness. The way the sea gathers itself before sunrise, preparing for a day neither promised nor denied. Each character, in their fashion, embraces a turning of seasons inside themselves. The walls they once measured by what others might see begin to soften, giving way to open corridors of possibility. Like the painter who abandons rigid sketches in favor of instinctual strokes, or the musician who rests in the spaces between notes, there emerges a willingness to trust that poise and conviction arise not from exertion alone, but from a deep alignment quietly cultivated over time. No longer preoccupied with the ceaseless weighing of strengths or missteps, they now discover an unexpected spaciousness where certainty breathes. The pulse of their narrative is not a march, but a steady expansion, a widening of perspective that allows complexities to resolve with gentler effort. Others, in turn, gravitate towards this presence, drawn not by promise or persuasion, but by a feeling that something quietly unshakable has taken root. As the evening deepens and the hush within becomes more pronounced, anticipation gathers in the pause before resolution. Questions left lingering in the air seem to settle softly, as if resting on the pale glow of an imminent revelation. This is a moment suspended, not between endings and beginnings, but in the heart of transformation itself. A moment where, just beneath the surface, identity and intention are reorganized, clearing a path for what is yet to unfold. With each passing breath, dreams edge closer, not chased but welcomed, and as the story arcs toward its close, there is the distinct sense that fulfillment approaches on its own terms, ready to be met in the new light of morning. Night now lingered in the corners of their rooms, imbuing everything with a gentle reflection that hadn't been there before. Anna reclined on her sofa, limbs unfolding as if letting go of invisible weights. She sensed a quiet shift, where once tension knotted her thoughts, now a calm certainty unspooled them. She could not point to an exact moment of change, but something essential had settled, a foundational awareness that invited her to move differently in the world. Out her window, lights scattered across distant hills, mirroring the steady rhythm inside her chest. This ease, earned not by conquest but by recognition, expanded through her like dawn welcomed after an endless evening. Meanwhile, Luis watched steam shiver above his teacup. He turned over in his mind the recent days, each marked by choices less frantic and yet more decisive. Listening for direction from within, he found his actions softening yet growing more impactful, as if each decision called forth possibility by simply existing in alignment with his truth. His mornings arrived no longer tangled in dread but unfurled with anticipation, easing him toward challenges as if drawn by gravity. He finally understood. The pursuit of validation now seemed like a distant echo, replaced by a magnetic steadiness whose measure had nothing to do with accolades. In the gentle quiet, he recognized that opportunities had always gathered where self-respect was both seed and shelter. Sophia, gazing across a rain-laced courtyard, let the melody of memory and hope drift through her. Moments before, she would have hidden uncertainty behind a shield of logic, but now she noticed her presence filling the space with a palpable intent. The world responded. Colleagues and companions alike approached not because of grand gestures, but for the assurance woven wordlessly through her interactions. Even silence brimmed with invitation. A lifetime spent seeking entry through external doors revealed its true lesson. When guidance arises from an internal compass, pathways appear unmarked on any visible map. In one last, silent interval before sleep, each of them realized prosperity had never been a distant shore to reach by frantic swimming or desperate signaling. Instead, it assembled around the unshakable quiet that emanates from an uncluttered mind and an open heart. The world, with all its currents and crosswinds, reacted more like water bending to a stone gently placed, naturally and with grace, responding to presence, certainty, and a willingness to stand firmly within one's own dignity. From these awakenings, a deeper implication shimmered just out of ordinary reach. True abundance orbits individuals who trust their posture even while standing unseen, unconcerned with applause or permission. The old narrative of striving and scarcity lost its hold, replaced by a sovereignty indistinguishable from tranquility, a mastery so complete it asks for nothing yet receives freely. They understood, at last, there is no rush and nothing to prove. Self-command, nurtured in tranquility, radiates outwards, shaping environments, relationships, and fortunes with an ease that requires no explanation. For anyone arriving at this gentle threshold, let the quiet that follows be an invitation. Consider which corners of your life might bloom when met with the same silent composure. The roadmap to lasting freedom and opportunity is not built of anxious striving, but charted by the unwavering direction found within. As sleep gathers and morning waits in the wings, let this presence, soft yet resolute, shape your next beginnings, orchestrating a new symphony where direction, respect, and prosperity arise in peace, needing no introduction but finding their place as naturally as breath.